Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com runs down the major markets. A drop in the Fed's bank rate did not spur much of a change in the stock markets. Ross looks at gold, silver, crude, and tells us uranium is really glowing on the markets. Ross also has a special offer for our listeners. The founder of Armstrong Economics, Martin Armstrong, joins us from Florida. He has put together a special 200-page plus report on how to bring peace to the Ukraine-Russia conflict and tells us some of the key points of that report. Martin also examines gold, silver, platinum, palladium, and rare earths. He also comments on whether President Trump's trade war could force Canada into becoming a U.S. state. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
Good to be with you, Jim.
How would you describe what happened on the stock markets this week?
Well, we got a little more excitement in the last 10 days or so. You know, the markets decided that it's that time of year where they want to come to life again. So, we had a really good spurt in the S&P from, 6,600 up to about 6,900. And, there's a few gaps on the way up. So, a lot of excess is there. And the Fed on Wednesday decided they would drop rates, but, it's only because they wanted to follow what was already happening in the T-bill market. And Treasury bills, which had been down through the latter part of the summer, got to enough of a discount to the Fed funds rate in September that the Fed changed their rate by a quarter point. And then again, here in the last week or two, that discount once again became very large, so the Fed followed in suit with their decline in rates. Market didn't take that terribly well because they're now talking about possibly not doing anything more in the near future, and that takes some of the wind out of the people that are looking at interest rates as the driving force on the market. I like to look at the credit side of the equation, and if we take a look at the high yield spread, the Bank of America High Yield Spread Index, the CCC, that one generated buy signals for us in the last week of March. And as it became excessive, and as we know, that was the bottom in the equity market a week later. And the CCCs have been just steadily stair-stepping their way down. That is the yield. So that has been constructive to the marketplace. There was a little uptick in that index a week ago, and it settled back down again. So we have ourselves established a very good resistance level to be monitoring. And historically, going back to the last 2 decades, right back to 1999, where we have data, if the CCC spread were to break out above the levels that we saw 2 weeks ago, then that would suggest that there's a change in trend back to a tightening, and that would not be good for equities. But for now, the CCC has dropped off nicely, and you just keep an eye on it to see what it has as we push forward. The other thing that we look at is the global money supply. When we go back historically, back into the 1970s, I used to plot figures from the Fed every week. We'd take a look at the money supply, we'd look at net free reserves, and if there was a change there of significance, then that had tended to have a good lead time of many weeks in terms of its upside or downside pressure to the equity markets. And right now, the global M2 has been steadily moving higher, and using its lead factor that we use right now, things look to be reasonably good. There's a spike low that we might anticipate in early December, and from there, we've been seeing good moves up once that money supply on the forward adjusted basis really comes to life again. That's what we saw in April, and that followed the negative turn we had seen in February. So for now, market trends are up, and we're seeing pretty good rotation out there. We take a look at things like Netflix and Microsoft, which is really tired out, and on the other side of the equation, Apple, which had been really oversold on a monthly basis with all of our indicators right in the first weeks of April, it had a really poor bounce off of that, settled around until August, not doing much at all. And then we saw a good cross of the 20-day moving average above the 50-day. The stock came back, created one of our springboard buys. That was around 220. It's now trading at 270, so up 35% since the 1st of August after some good signals there. And meanwhile, most of the Mag 7 have been just biding their time. And, it's classic rotation.
What's going on with gold?
Gold, really happy with the action here. We saw that accelerated move up to just shy of 4,400, and that was beautiful because it then took our exhaustion index that we look at up to levels that produce significant highs historically. This is the seventh example since the 1970s where it got up to this extreme. And the norm is that once you have your first day with a lower low, and that happened just after the top, then you look for the correction to be pretty hard and steep because you've got to clean out some of the Johnny-come-latelys. And in this case, the moving average level that we would look for is the 34-day moving average. That's a nice Fibonacci number. And in the previous examples, that was a good spot to see an interim low and a pretty good bounce. Well, this week we did exactly that. We got down to the moving average, and as of the middle of the week, we put out a note to subscribers telling us that we were at support and to expect a pretty good move on the upside. We've seen that already. This had been a 10% decline off the high, so that's pretty big. The mining stocks, as the bullion price rolled over, mining stocks were down anywhere from 18 to 20% in the big name items, and could be worse in the small juniors. So at this point, they've become oversold, and we're starting to see decent recoveries off the bottoms there. But this is just trading off an oversold low, and we'll see how it develops as we progress along here the next coming weeks. Silver, same type of action, that big accelerated move into the top and the reversal down. It got to its 50-day moving average, which is a reasonable spot to bounce in here. We've got a Bollinger Band resistance that we're looking at as a pretty key number in the coming weeks, because historically it takes about 2 to 3 weeks from the major high for it to come back and have a decent retracement rally towards resistance. The Bollinger Band is, for us, a key level that we'll be watching for. And after that, next chart in silver for us is down just over $40. So could be a pretty sizable decline in silver once this bounce happens off the lows.
What's going on with crude?
Crude, pretty decent rally off the bottom, and we weren't looking for that per se, but topped out around 63. We're sitting at 61 and change at this point. It's up to its 50-day moving average. Good resistance level there. Seasonality still is to the downside. The best moves historically have happened when you get really oversold in November through early January. So we'll continue to look for that as a potential buying opportunity. For now, patience, sit back. There's really nothing to do there as far as the crude oil price itself is concerned. But when you look at the stocks, things like the oil service group, OIH, has just been stair-stepping its way up. Pretty good rally in the last month from 240 and change up to 290. So that's a pretty big run. A little pullback there, and you could take a look at the oil service group as something to be picking up.
What's happening with the U.S. and Canadian dollars?
Great base here in the U.S. dollar. This is, we had that good oversold in reading 1st of July. Really nice solid bounce off the bottom into the 1st of August, and retested the lows for just a day or two in the middle of September, and it's been just walking up nicely. This week, we'll see its best close that we've had since back in May, so pretty good turn in here. We've seen the moving averages cross to the positive side, so that's the 20-day above the 50. Historically, when that happens, there's a pretty good continuation move on the upside. So for now, the 101 target that we have been talking about over the last few months looks to be a reasonable first upside for that one. And as such, that would continue to have downward pressure on a lot of the commodity-related items. The Canadian dollar has had a pretty feeble move here. We got oversold readings about 3 weeks ago, rallied up to a high on this week, and that's just back retesting the September lows, but not able to get up through the 72-cent level, which now is the key resistance. It's the 50-day moving average. It's where we get a sequential 9. So that's 9 consecutive days with closes above 4 days earlier. And once you're into a trend, in this case a downtrend, that gives us a good overbought reading to sell into. And it looks as though the Canadian dollar is just basically ready to stair-step its way lower. We're already down about 50 basis points since the midweek high, and it looks as though with the dollar underperforming now what we're seeing in crude oil, that the easiest path is to the downside.
What's going on with Bitcoin?
Bitcoin, the move this week has had a lot of volatility in it. We had a day with the down 3,000 and bouncing back at the latter part of the week. But the 106,000 level is a reasonable support right now. But gosh, when you take a look at areas of where there has been risk on or risk off, usually the NASDAQ and the Bitcoin would move along together. But in this last month, Bitcoin, has failed significantly. It put in the high early in October, about 125,000. Now the bounce most recently in this last week or so is at 117,000, considerably off the high. So, Bitcoin is out of favor, and it's going to take quite a bit to get that market turned around again. On a longer-term basis, the weekly moving average, the 50-week moving average, has been a pretty good support level. You go back into the third quarter of 2023, you go the first quarter of last year, and again here in the last couple of weeks, testing that moving average. That's a pretty important support level. So, keep an eye on this. If this 106, maybe down to 104,000 level doesn't hold, that would suggest that there's a big change in trend, and there could be a fair amount of volatility to the downside.
Ross, you have a glowing report on uranium?
Yeah, here we are. Brookfield, Westinghouse, Cameco all get together with the government, and gosh, and $80 billion worth of promises and contracts moving forward. As we clearly need to do something from an energy perspective, and you want to have something other than wind and solar to have a good solid base that businesses can rely upon, and uranium is the place to be. So, this contract has really sparked life once again in the index. We had been looking at the correction 2 weeks ago down to the 50-day moving average on Cameco and URA as first reasonable supports, but thought that a deeper correction might be possible. And guess what? News will definitely surpass the technicals, and in this case, it was the news in the early part of the week that popped Cameco from 80 and change up to $110. There's a pretty big gap there. You'd look to see that filled, but the upside potential in the whole sector now clearly comes to life again. And our long-term conviction is that this is a sector that you have to own. Just try and find the appropriate entry points.
And Ross, it's no trick here. You have a treat for our listeners.
We're going to do a special here the next week or two. So if you log on to the chartsandmarkets.com, on the front page, we've got a special offer there for new subscribers.
Ross, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Well, good to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com. Find him on X at Charts by Ross. Coming up, Martin Armstrong, next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, available online at armstrongeconomics.com. He's speaking to us from Florida. Marty, welcome back to This Week in Money.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. How are you doing?
We're doing great here on the West Coast.
Well, on the west coast of Florida, so I get to see the sunsets too.
Yeah, that's the best part of the day.
Yeah.
Your 2025 World Economic Conference in Orlando is just around the corner, November 21st to 23rd. Can you tell us about it and how our listeners can attend or watch the virtual live stream?
Well, it is being, actually, ever since COVID, we started, live streaming it. And so now it's like, I think in like 44 countries, even China. So this year, probably, I would say the crux of this is going to be, war and peace negotiations and what this has to do with the markets, because, like, for example, gold, etc., it doesn't really go up with inflation. It's been rising up into October, all on geopolitical issues. And now, you're getting to the point with some discussions of possible, peace with Russia, as well as going on in the Middle East. So that's something why you see, gold and silver backing off, which is normal for probably a couple-month period. And then we have to see how this shakes out. But most of my sources in Europe they're really shaking in their boots because they really feel that the EU is kind of desperate. It's broke. You even have finance ministers of UK and France admit that they might even need an IMF bailout. And if they can pretend that, Putin has done something to justify, then what I hear is that, their real objective is just to keep the nearly $400 billion that they stole from Russia and froze to begin with. Then they get to put it into their budgets and pretend it's justified.
This week, the Fed lowered its rate by a quarter point to a range of 3.75 to 4% and is ending quantitative tightening. The Bank of Canada dropped its bank rate by a quarter point to 2.25%. Are these moves bullish for the stock markets, commodities, and real estate?
Not really. That tends to be more of a propaganda piece, but if you really step back and look at how the stock market has performed with, interest rates, you'll see it rises with rising interest rates, and it falls when interest rates decline. I mean, interest rates dropped from 6% to 1% in the Great Depression. Didn't help. 2008, 2009, same thing. Interest rates always go down in a recession with the stock market. Most of this tends to be propaganda that was set in motion by, the socialists under Roosevelt. But if you look at how they interpreted markets before then, when interest rates would rise, they would cheer, and they basically say that shows the market is still bullish and there's a bid for money. When people don't want to invest, interest rates keep going down and down and down, trying to get people to buy. The interest rates are more of a factor on mortgages and things of that nature rather than the stock market per se.
Gold, silver, palladium, and platinum all put in tops last week. Does Socrates see these tops as being short-term or long-term?
Still more short-term. Probably a couple months, reaction down to retest support. At gold, it's down, major supports around 3,200. The first level of supports, around 37. But, it's, the markets have rallied, like I said, more on geopolitical issues. And then all of a sudden you have peace in the Middle East, perhaps, peace negotiations, at least hinting at Russia. And then, you just had Trump with his meeting with Xi and, coming to an agreement there. So everybody kind of looks like, oh, well, the world's okay now, But we'll see. I mean, there's still a lot of issues. I mean, you got unemployment rising, and you definitely still have inflation rising. So largely you're looking at what we've been forecasting is that we're moving more into stagflation between now that won't really bottom until probably 2028. And that's really all about the fact that you have shortages from COVID, then you have war, and all of this has created largely shortages in a lot of different areas. And so you have rising prices but lower economic growth.
You have a 209-page report that's hot off the press, your peace proposal to prevent World War III. It's titled, U.S. and Russia Reestablishing Peace. EU clings to its Marxism and war as its economy falters. How can our listeners download a free copy of that report?
You can go to our site. It's I was actually asked to do that. I was surprised. I got called in, went to a briefing on Russia, and they know we have offices around the world. So, and if you're going to be a real, I would say, international analyst, it can't be your opinion. You have to look at everything through the eyes of who the client is. And, I was thought that way, a long time ago. So everybody will act out of their own self-interest. So I was largely called in because they knew I knew every side from a Sunday. And so I was asked, and I was very surprised, but that there was no peace deal and that nobody had come up with a plan. So I was asked, would I write a plan that I thought Putin would take? I said, okay, fine. And of course, it's always under the gun. I had 4 days to do it. And so I decided to, all right, we decided to release it to everybody to say, this is it. This is, basically, you have to cut through all the propaganda from mainstream press. As soon as you see any mainstream article that says, oh, Putin invaded Ukraine unprovoked, total BS. Don't even bother reading it because it's all propaganda coming from the neocons, really. This was a civil war which we started. And there was even a phone call that got leaked with Victoria Nuland, where she said, F the EU. They stuck in an interim government in 2014, and they were instructed to attack the Donbass. And so this is it. I mean, the civil war was started by Kiev. And that's why when Putin said he was not invading Ukraine, he was coming basically to the rescue of the Donbass. They called it a special operation. And, this is all laid out, really. There was a Minsk agreement, the solution to Ukraine. A 3-year-old can figure it out. I mean, when Czechoslovakia broke up, it was Czech Republic, Slovakia. Yugoslavia broke up. You got Serbia, Armenia, Croatia, Montenegro. They broke up according to ethnic lines. All right. These people in the Balkans and that whole area, they hate each other. This is kind of like, the Palestinians and Israelis. I mean, or expecting, Iran to, come to the synagogue and join, kumbaya with the Israelis. I mean, it's not going to happen. And the same thing, that whole region is a quagmire. It was originally conquered by the Ottoman Empire, so you have Muslims there. Then you have Orthodox Christianity, which goes to the Patriarch of Moscow. Then you have Western Christianity. All right. So you've got, then you have Judaism there. So you have basically four religions all conflicting with each other there. Ethnic groups that hate each other because, they did this to that. I mean, I was called in when Yugoslavia was before it broke up. And I was very surprised. They said, what they killed, 600 of us and they threw us in a common grave. And I thought I'd missed something in the news. I said, oh my God, really? I said, when did this happen? Oh, about 700 years ago. I said, oh, okay, that one, The memories live on forever. I mean, you can even, Google it up and you'll see the former Chancellor of Germany, Bismarck. In 1888, he said, Europe is going to be completely engulfed in war, and it's going to come from the Balkans. And he was right. Anybody that knows that area, they just hate each other. The only possible way to achieve peace, it has to be divided along ethnic lines. That was the Minsk Agreement. And you can even Google that. It was signed. Putin told Zelensky, this is very important. He should be allowed to vote. And it refused. All right? You had Merkel answer the press, former Chancellor of Germany, and I was shocked. I don't know if she had too much to drink or what, but they asked her, why didn't you honor the Minsk Agreement that everybody signed? And she publicly stated, well, we never intended to. We were just buying time for Ukraine to build an army to basically go to war with Russia. This is it. So I was asked, I know, I've been in the middle of all this stuff for so long. So I was asked to do a peace deal. I said, fine. I said, here it is. You want peace? You tell the EU, which is the real problem here. Putin does want peace, and so does Trump. All right? The problem is the EU. Zelensky takes all his orders from the EU and London and NATO. So, and you had Kalis, who's number 2 there in the EU government, actually came out and said, whatever Trump agrees with Putin, we're not going to follow because we're not at the table. Why should they even be at the table when the last time they signed an agreement, they refused to honor it? So I told them, I said, in this report, no matter what you propose, the EU is going to say they're not part of it and they're not going to honor it. So the only way around this is to say, you have to agree to the Minsk Agreement, which you signed. We're not proposing anything different. You allowed the Donbass to split and vote. And if you do not, I told them the U.S. should stand up and say, we will exit NATO. And for Zelensky, I told him that little scumball, basically, all he's interested is how much money he can get out of it. So I said an executive order should be issued that if he does not agree to honor the agreement, which was signed by everybody, that an executive order be issued and no American would be allowed to invest 10 cents in Ukraine. Cut off his $1 trillion dream, at the knees. Then maybe you'll get peace. But it's not going to get peace as long as these people can keep it going and thinking the more they destroy, the more money they're going to make. And it's disgusting. They don't care. And the press, these people want to believe what the press writes. If you really cared about the Ukrainian people, all right, when Zelensky came into power, the death toll was 130,000. It's 1.8 million now. He cares about his people. He takes his orders from NATO. I talk to people in Ukraine. Honestly, what they have said to me, plain is simple. If he was on fire, they wouldn't urinate on him until he was dead. His polls are now at 23%. He kidnaps people off the front line. Even there's documented proof. He's shown kids with Down syndrome, sending them to the front line to die, and didn't even give them a gun. Well, get one from somebody else that dies. I mean, it's. I'm sorry. I have no sympathy for Zelensky whatsoever. And I think basically he should be overthrown. And the Ukrainian people, this is what I told Washington, Ukrainian people are the ones that should be able to vote on their own country, not Zelensky. I warned the White House before. The first time you saw when Zelensky went to the White House and there was argument and everything else. That meeting was supposed to take place in Kiev. And my sources there called and said, hey, Boris Johnson just showed up here 3 days before, told Zelensky he had to go to the White House, and to embarrass Trump into keeping the money going so the war would not end. I passed that information on, and that's why it turned into basically like a high school food fight. And I think Rubio did come out later and said that this meeting was supposed to have been in Kiev and was changed by Zelensky just the day before. It's all theater, and that's it. I mean, nobody cares about how many people are dying or anything else. It's all like it takes two sides to tango, as they say, and that's what's been going on. It's just a complete false propaganda campaign on both sides, and there's just a lot of money that it's on the ground, and they want to pick it up. A lot of loose change around.
First, what is the Minsk agreement?
The Minsk agreement is the Donbass is basically Russian. Okay, Crimea is mostly Russians. They speak Russian. The signs are in Russian. About 15% of the population of Crimea are Tatars. And that's Mongols that came in and invaded that area in 1240. So about 15% of the population is still there. The Ukraine was never a country. Okay, the Russian Empire of the Tsars went right up to Kiev. Kiev is actually the first capital of the Russians, and it was destroyed by the Mongol invasion in 1240. So, to a large extent, that's why Putin has not nuked Kiev or something like that. He's a bit more of a historian, with some nostalgia. It would be, to him, destroying Kiev would be like the United States destroying London. Whereas the neocons behind him, like Medvedev, they don't care about that kind of stuff. If you get rid of Putin, he has no problem pushing the button. And, people have to understand that. Putin is probably the most restrained person you're going to have there. And what I warned Washington about, and I think part of why I was called in to do this, is people don't remember their history. When Khrushchev had to back out of the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, what happened? It was an embarrassment to Russia. There was a coup. He was overthrown, and Brezhnev came in, and then you got the real hard-line Cold War. Then Gorbachev comes to power. I put a book out. It's on Amazon, The Plot to Seize Russia. Right in the beginning, I got all of the declassified documents from the Clinton administration. So it's not conspiracy theory. Russia was invited to join NATO. I put the documents right up front. All right. So what happened? Their neocons were afraid that he would take that deal. If he took that deal, to them, that was Russia surrendering to their arch enemy, the United States and NATO. So they staged a second coup. Okay. He was overthrown. That's when Yeltsin stood up on the tank. Don't shoot on your own people. And they didn't. So the coup failed. All right. But they got rid of Gorbachev. And so my warning to them is, if you really think you can, embarrass Putin on this, and he was, oh my God, and leave and fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness, maybe he might last a couple hours before somebody kills him, or there's going to be a third coup. And the next person that's coming in, something like Medvedev or another neocon, now it's right on again, like Brezhnev. All right? They don't care. They're like Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham, actually in a meeting with Zelensky, had the audacity to say, this is the best money we ever spent to kill Russians. It's hard to get your head around these types of people. Okay? They're just biased. They're filled with hatred. And it's got nothing to do with national security. It's all they want is war, war, war. And it's always somebody else's kid that dies for them, not them. And so I think that's why I was called in, because I know the real truth behind the curtain. And I warned them that if you go in this direction and you embarrass Putin, you're going to have World War III. And it's not going to come from him. And all these people that make it sound like, oh, it's Putin, Putin, Putin. Really, who makes all the threats for nuclear war? Not Putin. Comes in from Dmitry, okay, and the rest of them. And you remove Putin, and you're going to see something much, much more serious.
Can you give us a Reader's Digest version of the U.S.-Russia reestablishing peace, EU clings to its Marxism, and war as economy falters?
Basically, aside from forcing the EU and Ukraine to honor the agreement they had already signed, allow the Donbass to vote, you can monitor it, Senate, UN, US, whatever. They're Russian. They're not going to want to be with the Ukrainian people anyhow. All right? That's a known fact. Ukraine is the motherland of ethnic cleansing. Bandera, they were killing Polish, Jewish, and Russian. And that's why the CIA protected them. All right? So, splitting is completely normal, and it's the only way that those people are going to ever see peace anyhow. So, to establish peace against the will of Europe, I propose, 1, you accept Putin's proposal to create a tunnel between Russia and Alaska. 2, we remove all sanctions. 3, allow American companies to go in and joint venture with Russian to mine rare earths. Why? Because China has a monopoly on rare earths. And this is in part why Trump was talking about Canada, 51st state, and Greenland, etc. All right. Why are rare earths even critical? It takes 920 pounds of rare earths to make just one F-35. It's a national security issue. Russia lacks the capital, but they have the expertise on how to do it, which we do not. So my proposal is that you open the floodgates, let American companies go in there, provide the capital, joint venture with Russians, and mine the rare earths. What will that do? It will accomplish two goals. One, it will help to split Russia from China. All right, that's what Nixon and Kissinger did. All right, our neocons ever since have pushed the two together. What it will also do is it will send a warning to the EU, back off, that America is going into joint ventures with Russia. And so it would help to prevent them from this nonsense. And trust me, they are in serious economic trouble. And sitting on $400 billion that they get to steal from Russia is a very, very major incentive to create any kind of a war. You hear them saying, "Oh, if a Russian drone flies over our land, that's it. We're going to start World War III. Although nothing's hurt, nobody's attacked, nobody died, but we'll send millions of people to their death because of a drone." No, it's more than that. They need the money. And they just look at every excuse. And people have to understand, when it comes to war, there isn't a single war that anybody has ever told the truth about, period. Even Churchill said, in time of war, truth needs a bodyguard of lies to protect it. And Iraq, weapons of mass destruction never existed. Vietnam, you can go on YouTube and you can see McNamara apologize before he died, that 58,000 Americans are dead. Well, we thought Russia was involved. Sorry, we were wrong. They haven't been right about a single war yet. And even Korea, they got into that. The only way they got out of it was finally threatening to nuke Korea, to bring them to the table. That was it. So there isn't a single war that they have ever won. Not Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. You go down the list. And then even you can see Tony Blair's apology, also on YouTube, about Iraq. And this illustrates the problem with these people. He says that he thought they were freeing the people from Saddam. And that the story is, we do that, we'll get a ticker tape parade, the people will cheer us. It's never happened once. All right? And he then admits, we had no idea, because they don't think past the end of their nose, that we would be subjecting them to sectarian violence. The Middle East, we drew those borders. We carved up the Ottoman Empire, not them. Okay? These people do not see themselves as Iraqi, Syrian, Libyan, etc. They first see themselves as Sunni, Shiite, Kurd, Druze. It's tribal. This is like the Balkans. We don't have this so much here in North America. You got a little bit of it in Canada with the French, but this is really, really ingrained in that whole Middle East and in the Balkan area. they just hate each other. And you're not going to solve that. This is, when you're talking about my God against your God, that's not negotiable. We're not playing Monopoly. I'll give you Boardwalk and you give me Park Place, It doesn't work that way. I guess that's why I get called into this, into this geopolitical mess all the time. But I at least understand the game, and I understand the different players on each side, and we've got office around the world, so I understand the thinking process. So it's interesting, to say the least, but I don't see long-term peace agreements in either region, because you're just talking about ethnic hatred that just goes back centuries.
Who did you write your peace proposal to prevent World War III for?
I can't give the names. I have to respect people's confidentiality. You don't burn your bridges. But I decided I would release it since I had to do it anyhow. But and also maybe to put pressure on every which side from Sunday. But I can't. All I can say is I was asked. I was also shown, I would say, in the meeting, the KGB file. It was probably about 3 inches thick on the JFK assassination. And I was told in the meeting, you do know that what we're trying to do right here is what they assassinated Kennedy for. I said, yes, I'm well aware of that. But this is the world we live in. It's people will do whatever they want for their own self-interest, and it's got nothing to do with the country or anything else.
Do you think Presidents Trump and Putin will read your report?
I have heard it was handed to Putin. I don't know if he read it or anything like that. I was at least told, because I did ask when I was called in. I said, is this something against Trump, or am I being asked to do something that's not sanctioned, or what? And I was told that it was sanctioned, and I was approved to be called in. So I don't know what that means, but I don't think it was anything from an adversarial type situation with Trump.
How high up were the people you met with in the Trump administration to get this report started?
I would just say, pretty high were personal contacts.
Have you received any response from the Trump administration regarding the report?
Well, I did get a text today from one of the people in the meeting, and it basically just said, keep the faith. So far, so good. And we're moving forward. So, look, all I can do is try.
With this report, do you think you might get a personal meeting with President Trump and or President Putin?
Who knows? I mean, I don't know about that. Do they, give credit to where something comes from? Probably, usually not. But if I was invited to Moscow to meet Putin, I certainly would go. I would think I believe in Sun Tzu, and I guess that's another reason why they call me in, is that if you do not understand the thinking process of your adversary, you will lose. You have to understand what they think and because that reveals what they're going to do. And if you can't do that, you have no business in the game. And this is why the neocons deliberately tell all these leaders, do not meet with Putin. Why? Because they don't want peace. I was in Washington, called in by the Reagan administration back in '85. And that's when Gorbachev came to power. And Reagan wanted to meet with Gorbachev. The neocons, they were beside themselves. They did everything but just about overthrow the government. They lobbied against Congress to reject anything that Reagan did. And the whole thing was, he shouldn't even talk to these people, that they are evil. They couldn't say that Gorbachev was still a communist. So the stick that I heard back then, well, you can never trust a Russian. And that's what I mean. I think there's a psychological problem with these people, that they spent their whole life hating Russians because they were communists. And so communism falls, but they didn't change. So why are we adversaries with Russia? Granted, under Khrushchev, it was communism versus capitalism, and we will bury you. All that's gone. All right, that's gone. That was a philosophical war. You have McCarthyism and Red Scares and all that stuff in the 50s and 60s, and all that's done. It's gone. Russians aren't communists. They're not interested in going back. That's why Yeltsin handed it to Putin, because Putin, was not an oligarch and he wasn't a communist. Where Yeltsin had an impeachment motion against him by the old USSR people who were communists, who wanted to take the country back. That's why he turned to Putin, because he was on neither side. He was in between. And so, you get the John McCains and the rest of them, they can't give up their hatred. This is the same thing I see in the Middle East. You have these people from Hamas. They've been raised from, children, okay, hate Jews. Do you really think you can come to a peace agreement and they're suddenly going to say, oh, yes, they're my brother? Not going to happen. These people are ingrained in hatred. I've seen this with like Lindsey Graham, the rest of them. I argued with Bill Kristol, whose father started the neocon movement. He said, if we remove Saddam, Assad out of Syria, and Gaddafi, will bring peace to the Middle East. All three are gone. Where's the peace? It's just hatred that these people come up with. And they don't, from what I can see, it doesn't matter, and like I explained in the meeting, I said, look, they know I've been to dinner with some of these people, etc. And I said, the only thing I can explain is that communism fell all by itself, and they're just angry they didn't get to shoot anybody. That was it. They spent their whole life waiting to have war with Russia, and it didn't happen.
A while ago, there was talk that President Trump and President Putin were working together to put an end to money laundering, biolabs, human trafficking, child trafficking, and much worse. A lot of it in the neocon stronghold called Ukraine. Have you heard anything on that?
Yeah. I mean, most of the propaganda that ICC wanted to, declaring Putin a war criminal for removing children from Ukraine. Really? I mean, Basically, they were not Ukrainian kids. They were, ex-Russian kids. I mean, the biolabs, look, they did that. The same thing over again, at biolabs in Asia on the borders with China. Look, we have some nasty people in our government, just as they do. China's got neocons. Russia's got them. We got them. I mean, I don't, honestly, the Biden administration was probably the worst in history. You had Garland, you had Victoria Nuland, and you had Blinken. 3 people in the same administration with a president that didn't even know what day of the week it is, but 3 of them all claiming that their families were from the Balkan area. And all 3 of their families were persecuted by Russians. That's a conflict of interest. They started this war for personal vendetta reasons, not national security. As simple as that. I mean, it's Washington Post even did an interview because they found out that Zelensky knew when Putin was going to cross the border. And they said, why didn't you, warn your people? Look it up. His response was, well, if I told them, I would have lost $7 billion. Quote, unquote. And this is the guy who represents the Ukrainian people? He's up for the highest bid.
There's also talk President Trump has been and is working with the military to rid the world of evil. Have you heard anything on that?
Well, from the drugs standpoint, yes. He's very intent on that. Being here in Florida, there are a number of people from Venezuela that fled. They had family here, and they came here to be taken care of because of hyperinflation, etc. And they said their pensions won't even buy a cup of coffee anymore. So, I mean, look, there are forces out there that have their own agendas, and they will act out of their own self-interest and do whatever they need to do so they can further their ideas. You have the globalists that think that this one world government will be the panacea to, for the future. And it's really about control. They want to control everybody. I have a video on my site. Google it up. I mean, Holland, the former president of France, standing up in the European Parliament along with Merkel and admitting that the whole purpose of the EU was to create one government to end war. And I've argued with these people. I said, fine, Rome was one government. How many civil wars did they have? All right. It doesn't stop the problem. All right. No matter what country you go to, you're always going to have left and right, period. You never get 100% consensus in any government, no matter what it is. In Plato, he recorded the debate between Thrasymachus and Socrates. And I tend to agree with Thrasymachus. He warned Socrates it didn't matter what form of government you have. Democracy, aristocrat, dictatorship, whatever. He said, justice is the same in all forms of government. It's only the self-interest of those in power. Just look at Britain. What happened to the English Bill of Rights? They throw a guy in prison for 22 months for simply saying he's tired of his money going to illegal aliens that rape our children. 22 months in jail for that. I mean, it's in Britain, and charging another guy, excuse me, do you speak English? Oh, that's racism. It's going completely off the wall. I was in London, last year in May, and I knew it would be the last time I would be there. I've been invited back several times. I said, sorry, I will not go to London anymore. I said, why? Because Stanford would probably lock me up for something I said 10 years ago. There's no rule of law left in London. Zero. And he does whatever he wants, and he's basically a dictator. That's it.
Before President Obama installed President Zelensky, Ukraine was said to have a stable government. Is Zelensky likely to remain president of Ukraine much longer?
Well, he is down to about 23%, and I can say, at least in May of last year, there was an attempted assassination on him, and what he did, he fired his Ukrainian bodyguards. He doesn't even trust the Ukrainian people. And his bodyguards are really American and British. And look, I don't see how the guy could possibly retire in that country. He'll be killed. He has destroyed Ukraine. He has killed, so many people hate him. I even spoke to the military when they were initially told to go to the border with, Russia. They thought they were just going to guard the border. Then they got the order to invade Kursk. They told me that order came from MI6 out of London. And what was the purpose? They were, maybe if we invade Russia, that will get Putin to attack anything in NATO, and that will start World War III. This is all what it's about. You got Boris Johnson. Google it up. He made the front page of Norwegian press publicly stating Britain is in a proxy war with Russia. And, this is the peace problem from Putin's side. Put the other hat on. All right? He knows this is not a war with Ukraine. This is now a war with NATO. All right? The foreign minister of China met with Kalis, the number 2 there in the EU. All right? I did put that on my blog. I had sources there. She told him, you should tell Russia to surrender and get out. His response was, we are not prepared to allow Russia to lose. He followed it up saying, because we know we would be next. All right. So you can't, this is what's going on. They know this has nothing to do with Ukraine. Okay. Ukraine was just the excuse. And this is all about how much money can we make out of this if we turn it into another war. And they could care less how many people die. They really don't care.
Does it look like the days for the unelected European Union are numbered?
Yes, I don't see the EU surviving past about 2030. All the interviews I do from Netherlands down to Palermo. 3 years ago, they would say, you really sure the EU is going to break up? I said, yes. Now all I get is, when? We've had enough. Even had Merz, which did surprise me, from, the Chancellor of Germany, come out and actually criticize the EU that they have gone too far into socialized dictatorial decrees, like on these migrants. I was speaking to people in the Romanian government, and they were instructed by the EU to accept another 100,000 people from the Middle East. They can't speak the language. They have no skills. Why? Basically, these people think that they'll be able to draft them hand them a gun and say, go kill some Russians. They are absolute fools. The British newspaper Express last week just ran a whole article on it. All right. If you don't show up for the draft, you will be, embarrassed. You'll be shamed. Already, every country over there is talking about initiating, drafts. I had one client that was in the Vienna Peace Conference. After he left, he called me. He says, "This has got nothing to do with peace anymore. Everybody's talking about just initiating drafts, and it's all about war." Europe is the problem.
Do you think the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, will look into intelligent assets and their involvement in Ukraine?
I'm hoping so. People have to understand this is all being manipulated for people that are going to make a ton of money if they can create war. And the EU, its main incentive, they know they are falling apart. When they were creating the euro, I got called into that. I sat down with them and said, okay, fine, here's how we create a currency. We have to consolidate the debt. And Helmut Kohl was the chancellor at the time of Germany, and he didn't allow the German people to vote. Because he admitted before he died, he said that if he allowed the German people to vote on joining the euro, he would have lost 7-3. So he took Germany into it without the people having a right to vote. And what he did was he insisted that there would be no consolidation of the debt. Now, from a trader's perspective, all right, what's the difference? That look at the banking system. Our banking systems here, the reserves are in the federal debt. Okay. If it was state debt and California got in trouble, the banking system goes down. Why? Because they're going to start looking, which bank has the most California debt? Short that one. Who else is in that? Oh, Illinois, they're in trouble. Short that one. All right. Because it's federal debt, that doesn't happen. In Europe, that does happen. All right. Like I said, you just had France and the UK admit publicly, the finance ministers, that they may need an IMF bailout. France is the second largest economy in the EU. If that happens, what will take place? The traders are going to look at all the banks, who has the most French debt, short it. Okay? So you're looking at a banking crisis in Europe. Then you have the same problem with the pension funds, because 70% on average of pension funds must be in government debt. All right? You're looking at the default, the sovereign default of these governments. All right? And they went negative on interest rates in 2014. They stayed negative until 2022. I warned them. You are strip mining your pensions, and the banks with negative interest rates, forcing the banks to buy government debt that's now negative. All right. The same thing with pension funds. I mean, these people, that's why I say politicians should be allowed anywhere near economics, because they always act out of whatever it is for their personal vendettas and self-interest, not for the country. So Europe is an absolute basket case. And this is why they need war. This is why they're looking for any excuse to steal the $400 billion from Russia. And in France, I can tell you, they call Macron the Petit Napoleon. Why? Because he actually has, proposed that, we could take Russia and get the 75 trillion in natural resources that they have. That's twice the size of the national debt of the U.S. Then Europe will rise again like the Roman Empire and lead the world. And your Carney wants to join this stuff. Look, this is crazy. All right? Absolutely crazy. This is why when when Trump came out, he made his sarcastic reports that people didn't quite understand. He said, yeah, Russia's a paper tiger. And Ukraine, yeah, you keep all your land and go take more. This is what the neocons are saying over there. He was making, basically a joke of it. And, Russia's not a paper tiger. I'm sorry. And if you think, this is what the NATO is saying. They just threatened Putin and said, we will flatten Moscow. All right. They act as if they can do whatever they want. And Russia can't even fire a shot back. They act like it's a one-sided game. All right. This is like Dick Cheney on Iraq. Oh, we'll win in just a few days, maybe a couple weeks. Right? Not 8 years. The same. They have never told the truth about anything. NATO is telling everybody that they have basically 3.4 million troops. And that includes if they draft you in Canada and the United States. All right? Against Russia's 1.5. We can walk in, Putin will fall to his knees and beg for his life. This is the stuff that they're talking about. As if nobody's going to get shot. I'm sorry. You're coming in and I know what your objective is. This is not to push Russia out of Ukraine. This is for the conquest of Russia. That's a different game. And you think you're going to get away with that? They're going to push the button. This is what I've warned Washington. You walk into my house and you intend to kill me. I got a gun. I'm not going to use it. It's a different game. We're not talking about pushing him just out of Ukraine. That's not the issue anymore. This issue is much more serious than that.
Do you think rare earths could play a role in reestablishing peace between the U.S. and Russia?
Yes, I do. Mainly because China has a monopoly on it. That means that Russia is also subservient to China. So, drop the sanctions, enter into a joint venture, allow American companies to provide the capital and go in. Russia has the expertise to do this. And then you split the two. So I think rare earths, is a very important thing. And that was also part of the proposal of Putin to do a tunnel from Russia to Alaska, that the Russians could come in and help the Americans mine rare earths up in Alaska, because we don't have the expertise to do it.
Do you think Presidents Trump and Putin will likely make a trade deal?
I am hoping. Part of this proposal I put in, I've explained why, for example, Rome lasted 1,000 years. It did because of free trade. If you're in France and you can make a vase and you could sell it to somebody in Syria because you're part of the empire. If you're on the outside looking in, that's not the case. So it was more beneficial to be part of the Roman Empire than on the outside. That is your your key to peace. Putting up sanctions, stuff like this, it does not promote peace. And they have never worked once. We put sanctions on Cuba when Castro came in. Oh my God, in 1960. So what happened? And very simple. What happened was that they, you had the situation there that they put the sanctions on in 1960. They are still there today. Didn't work. Look at Iran. We put the sanctions on Iran in 1979 to overthrow the Ayatollah. You're still there. You can't show me one incident where sanctions have ever worked even once.
Sounds like President Putin wants to do a deal. If President Zelensky and the neocons won't agree to a deal, what options does President Trump have?
Well, basically what I put in the report was threaten them to, exit NATO if they refuse to sign, and cut off all investment whatsoever permanently by any American, directly or indirectly, to Ukraine. That's the only way to get these people to relent and knock this stuff off. Otherwise, they will do whatever they can, and Zelensky's already had videos. Oh, it's going to be the biggest investment opportunity of Europe rebuilding Ukraine.
Is the World Economic Forum likely deeply involved in the mess in Ukraine, and should President Trump declare the World Economic Forum an international terrorist organization like he did with Antifa?
I personally would. It's not a good organization. They have, it's this whole nonsense. You own nothing to be happy. It's all a Marxist agenda that has been tried so many times and has failed every time. Yet there are a bunch of academics that have no real practical experience, and they just keep coming up with the same solution all the time. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, the inequality in wealth is the real problem. Really? They talk about it on the individual level. Oh, he's got more than me. That's not fair. What about countries? You see the same thing between countries. The more productive a country, the richer the country becomes. Okay? You can have all the wealth, like China, Russia has 75 trillion in natural resources in the ground. But if you don't have the infrastructure, you don't have the freedom, which they did not have under communism, it's still there.
President Trump warned if people wanted to traffic drugs into the U.S., they'd likely end up dead. He's green-lighted the blowing out of the water of some suspected drug boats due to the building of the southern border wall in the U.S. Mexican drug cartels have set up operations in Canada along with the Communist Party of China and a number of gangs. What do you think President Trump will do about Canada, the narco state?
Well, I think he after Venezuela, etc., I think he'll probably turn to that more. But look, drugs are a big business. They make a ton of money on this, and there are people that make a lot of money pretending to be police against it, etc. It's well known even in New York City. They arrest these drug dealers if they had $500,000, in cash. What shows up on their indictments is $250,000. And they're told, keep your mouth shut, because if there is more money, you get more time. Where's the rest of the money going? It goes into slush funds and stuff. You'll never know where it goes.
Yeah, the cynical part of me has the more drug boats you blow up, the pricier the drugs get, the more money you can make selling drugs.
It's you can't deny that. It's the only thing you could possibly say is it gets so expensive that people can't afford to do it. I don't know, but it's definitely a problem. A lot of people die from it, and a lot of times young kids do it to think they're cool or whatever, to be peer pressure, you name it. I don't know if you're really going to ever stop it, but it's definitely an issue.
Is Canada likely to become the 51st state annexed by the U.S. or part of a United Kingdom like North American Union along with the U.S., Greenland, and Mexico possibly?
I do think Canada will probably split, West versus the East, mainly because you have different economies. And somebody like Carney doesn't appreciate that. He was one of the founders of the net zero nonsense. And, look, it's becoming more obvious. I was even surprised that even Bill Gates came out and said that climate change is exaggerated. We have all the data going back, even daily temperatures in New York City back to 1869. You don't see a warming period. And I put on the blog just the other day, the last real warming period was 1922. And you read the newspapers back then, all the ice is going to melt. The seals have no place to go. It's the same thing. And all this float, the cities are going to go underwater. The sea's going to rise. That was 1922. What happened to that? Ozone layer. We're all going to die from that. Let's raise taxes. I guess the taxes fix the hole. We don't hear about that one either. Look, there's a natural cycle to everything. All right. There's been warming periods and ice ages. These things have taken place long before anybody even discovered fossil fuels. But for whatever reason, you have people that always want to, they have what I call linear analysis that, it went up 1 degree this year, so it's going to do that for the next 200 years. We're all going to die. Anybody that's an investor knows just because the Dow goes up 1,000 points today doesn't mean it goes up 1,000 points tomorrow. In finance, we don't use linear analysis. And social sciences, they use linear analysis. Oh, look at this, 1 degree every year, and we're all going to die. Things don't work that way. And this is why they're always wrong. Simple as that.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford ran edited propaganda commercials in the U.S. during the first two games of the World Series, targeting President Trump, quoting President Reagan's stand on tariffs. President Trump responded by tacking on an additional 10% tariff on Canadian goods. Do you think Trump could use tariffs to bring Canada under the wing of the U.S.?
No, I don't think so. But I do think it's in the self-interest of the West, from Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, to eventually separate from the East. U.S. will break up as well. And so is Europe. Europe is not going to remain united. You have different economies. And I remember back in the 80s, they were raising interest rates there in Toronto because there was real estate speculation. Meanwhile, they're putting farmers and miners into bankruptcy on the West Coast. This is all an outgrowth of socialism. Before Roosevelt, we had, the reason we have, these 12 branches of the Fed, very simple. That each branch, you can look at the old newspaper of 1927, for example, and you'll see each branch was independent. So if there was a shortage of cash in the Midwest, they would raise interest rates to attract money from the East. When Roosevelt came in to sell his socialistic New Deal, he usurped all the power of the Federal Reserve, installed it in Washington, and that he decided who would be chairman. All right. When he did that, it became one interest rate for everybody. Canada has followed that. Economically, it is wrong. Okay? One size does not fit all. And raising interest rates because there's real estate speculation in Toronto, or you're putting other people into harm on the West Coast, illustrates why you don't have a centralized government. All right? Even if you look at Russia, Lenin, to a large degree, did understand that. His proposal was the Soviet Union. Each republic retained its sovereignty. All right? He even wrote a letter warning, do not let Stalin succeed me. It's widely believed that Stalin may have even poisoned him. Stalin seized power, and what did he do? He did the same thing as Roosevelt. He usurped all the power into Moscow. Under Lenin, a republic had the right to even secede from the Union. Under Stalin, that was removed. So once you create a centralized power, then you get this one-size-fits-all. But your economies do not follow in that direction. You have more commodity-based on the West Coast, like Texas, compared to New York, which is more financial-based. All right, we always used to call it the Texas-New York arbitrage. When oil was doing really great, Texas is booming, there's inflation, and New York has got trouble. All right, when oil goes down, Texas is in trouble, and New York will be booming. So it was always the Texas and New York arbitrage. This is why centralized governments do not make sense. You can't get in here and then start directing the economy because you want to win the next election. It doesn't work that way.
Concerns of corruption and election fraud in Canada at all levels of government are getting louder. Canada is under heavy influence from outside entities, including the World Economic Forum and the Communist Party of China. So it looks like Canadians are not going to be able to vote their way out of corruption and trouble. How can we get out of this? The U.S. Articles of Confederation include a provision to expand the U.S. into Canada. Could Canada be looking at a choice here? Be part of something big, the U.S., or be economically and socially destroyed?
Well, economically, it certainly would make more sense for the West to join with the United States. Your taxes would be lower. You would get more rights in the sense of state rights, etc. But look, there have been many, many proposals from the very beginning about U.S. and Canada joining together. It was partially done. Canada made this decision to adopt the dollar because of trade with the United States rather than the British pound. So I mean, this back and forth has been going on for a very long time. France was always, interfering with Quebec. He had de Gaulle there in '67. Basically telling France to separate. Quebec to separate. You had even a party. It was called the 51st Party, the 51st State Party, in Quebec to separate from Canada and join the United States. All this stuff has been going on back and forth for a very, very long time.
Could Canada, one way or another, joining the U.S., cause civil unrest in Canada and the U.S.?
Well, we're probably going to end up with civil unrest one way or the other. But look, the U.S. is not the panacea here either. It's we see rising tensions, the same as in Europe. The left versus the right, it's crossed the line. It's no longer just merely a discussion or an adversary. If Trump says the sky is blue, the Democrats must come out and say it's red, regardless of what color it is. We've gone to the point of it's not an adversary, they are the enemy. And this is a serious development, but long term, this is the underlying cause of how republics die. And that's what our computer does show, that we're moving greater. The civil unrest side should tick up next year. Economically, what you do get is, look, we've run correlations, very simple. All right. War comes when the economy turns down. When everybody's fat and happy and prosperity is everywhere, you do not see war. There was a major financial panic in Europe in 1912. All right. You ended up with war by 14. Then there's, you have the Great Depression. All right. What comes after that? World War II. It's always the same thing. You don't see a war during economic prosperity. It always comes basically as a result of economic decline. And governments are more interested right now in retaining power. So that's why you're seeing in Europe attacks on freedom of speech. Freedom of speech no longer exists there. And then they pretend that, the ultimate irony was calling Putin a dictator. Really. Or at least he has stood for election. The EU design was to prevent any election. Ursula doesn't stand for election. She's never stood for an election, even for class clown. They're appointed. You get to vote in Europe only for the parliament. But then look at what the parliament can do. It has no power to even write a law. All the laws are written by somebody in the back room, in the commission, who are all appointed. There is no election. They did not want to have the risk of being thrown out of office. That's why when Trump was elected in 2016, you can Google it. They were in a state of panic. They suddenly saw that the people could actually vote them out of power. Like, oh my God, how could that happen? We can't be thrown out. This is our vested interest. London FT did a piece on it. They were in a state of panic. This is why, you get the, they hate democracy. They do not like it. They view us as too stupid to know what is good for our own good.
Do you think Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is an economic hitman?
I don't know if he's a hitman, but I mean, he's part of this whole globalist agenda, and they believe what they believe. It's not that they actually know what they're doing. They really think that this Marxist agenda is, all right, fine, it failed every other time, but we're doing it different this time. It's always different. They don't understand human nature, and that's at the crux of the whole problem. And this is why Eastern Europe, China, Russia, the average person there does not want to return to communism. They've tasted the freedom, and that's basically it. So, it's a different animal today. Communism is when the government owns everything. China may still call themselves a communist government or party, but they're not communists. But if they had to change the name, then they got to take Mao's picture down off of the Forbidden Wall or the Forbidden City and admit that he was wrong. That's a loss of face. So they keep the name. Okay, but they probably got more billionaires than the United States does. They're certainly at least the second largest economy in the world. So they're not communist. Authoritarian maybe, but they're certainly not communists.
According to the Crypto Wealth Report, as of September 2025, Bitcoin and other cryptos reached a record value of $3.3 trillion US. Could all of that crypto wealth all of a sudden disappear?
The biggest risk that you have in that area mainly comes from Europe, as they're in economic trouble. They're trying to push through their CBDCs. And at that stage in the game, what they're looking to do is they will cancel the paper currency, force you into their CBDCs, and they will most likely also outlaw, make it illegal to have any kind of account in Bitcoin. Why? Largely because that would be, an avenue for capital to circumvent what they're trying to do. And Europe is routinely, I would say, they still keep their one foot in the Marxist world. They routinely cancel their currency. Even Britain does. Why? Because let's say you had 100,000 stashed in a safety deposit box in cash. They cancel the currency. They force you to bring that out, come to the government to exchange it for the new one. Then what comes? Oh, gee, where'd you get this? Did you pay your taxes? This is why they do that. This is in part why the United States dollar is really the reserve currency. 70% of them are outside the United States, because everybody knows U.S. doesn't cancel the currency. So it's safer to hold dollars in China, and nobody holds euros, because who the hell knows, if it's going to be any good or not. I've traveled around the world a lot. I've got, the high denomination Indian rupees in my wallet from the last time I was there. They're all canceled. This is just standard for them. Canada did cancel its high denomination notes. It's clearly a Marxist agenda. So I would be careful about the cryptos, because once the EU launches its CBDCs, they don't want competition. So just keep that in mind.
Where can our listeners find out more about your World Economic Conference coming up November 21st through 23rd and download your hot off the press 209-page report, U.S. and Russia reestablishing peace, EU clings to its Marxism and war as its economy falters?
Go to armstrongeconomics.com. You can download that report for free. This is our 40th anniversary, actually, of the first WEC. The first one was 1985. I'm not so sure I'm going to be doing this after this year, but it's there. Nigel Farage called us the alternatives to Davos. So we're not the pushing for world dominance and stuff like that. We have to, people come to us, largely individuals, institutions, because they want the truth. That's it. We have to look at this from a trader standpoint, not an academic.
Martin, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Well, thank you. It's always great to hear you. You always got good questions.
My guest has been Martin Armstrong, founder of Armstrong Economics, available online at armstrongeconomics.com. He was speaking to us from Florida. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark and Martin Armstrong. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for our show or for our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen.